Yuletide cheer and Christmas about an enormous matchup on Sunday with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But for one afternoon on Sunday, for one fleeting moment, it looked like it was all sort of withered away after a couple of faux pas by the Ravens late on Sunday afternoon against the Philadelphia Eagles. Here to discuss all things victory that almost felt like it was snapped out of the or defeat snapped out of the jaws of victory the other way around. 27-26. They won, only because you can't win by fractions or decimals, right, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, you always subscribe to a win is a win, especially when you get into this late stage of the season, knowing you have to win games in order to make the postseason. And the Ravens have played well enough this year to keep themselves in that position. But, boy, you go back to the play call that John Harbaugh said, and I quote, all-time worst call ever, to throw the ball from the 11-yard line with 6 minutes remaining, and you have a first down, an opportunity to milk at least another minute and a half, if not more, off the clock and kick a field goal, and Marty Morningwig inexplicably calls for a pass play. Joe Flacco inexplicably throws an interception there, and then Philadelphia makes what was a 10-point lead and looked like it was going to be kind of cruise control over the last few minutes. They take it down to the Ravens being on the brink of the worst loss of the John Harbaugh era. Easily would have been the worst loss of the John Harbaugh era, if not for an incomplete two-point conversion. The Ravens win 27-26. Everything's still in front of them as far as next week's showdown with Pittsburgh, but, I mean, that is just a head-scratcher in so many different ways. And
well, it doesn't instill any confidence going into Christmas, that's for sure.
No. I mean, yeah, and even before that happened, let's face it, I mean, this Ravens team did not play the kind of game that inspired a ton of confidence that they were going to go to Pittsburgh and win. I mean, certainly they can do that, but based on the way they played on Sunday, you didn't feel any better about their prospects, and certainly, it's just, this offense continues to frustrate. They ran the ball really, really well on Sunday, and it's just the latest example of, and I tweeted this out at WNST, that I just don't think they like or care to run the football. I mean, you can keep talking about it being in your DNA. You can keep talking about it being something, an important part of what you do. But
well, we got 14 games here, dude. We got 14 games in the body of work. I mean, it is what it is.
It is, and it's just, that was utterly ridiculous. And look, we know John Harbaugh has been the type who has constantly avoided comparison questions. Even the most innocuous of comparisons that you can make, Harbaugh tends to avoid those types of things. So for him to boldly, bluntly label it as the all-time worst call ever, one, it's right up there with some of the worst calls. As I said to you in the post-game locker room, if they lose that game, you're looking at that specific play call almost in a way that you're looking at Buck Showalter not bringing in Zach Britton. Like, that's how foolish that was. But it really speaks to where Marty Morningwig stands at this point. I think many of us were wondering whether he was going to be back as offensive coordinator anyway, and anything short of the Ravens suddenly figuring out randomly in Week 16 that they're going to score 35, 40 points a game and going on to win a Super Bowl or something along those lines. Hard to envision Morningwig coming back as the offensive coordinator after what transpired on Sunday. And let's face it, I mean, hasn't really given them the spark with their offense that they were looking for when they fired Mark Trestman after Week 5 anyway. But again, you can talk all you want about the running game being important. The Ravens once again proved in a big moment that, well, it just wasn't all that important to them. They'd much rather throw the ball.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him, Luke, at WNST.net. Of course, blogging always, and it will be in Owings Mills during this holiday week as we get ready for the Pittsburgh Steelers game later on in the week. I thought that I want to do a little history thing here. We'll get into the X's and the O's, and we'll talk about Morningwig. We'll talk about running the ball and the stars and the goats of Sunday afternoon's game against the Eagles. But I really had to think about this in the aftermath of the game, Luke. The worst loss, no doubt, the Cundiff thing and the Evan. But I'm talking about a game they should have won, a game they had won. A Joe Pisarcik kind of game, right? I don't know that I really recall. I remember having a couple of big leads. They blew a big lead to the Bengals 10 years ago, when the Bengals still weren't any good. It was one of those jaw-dropping. Carson Palmer threw 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They've had a couple of those, but this one, I mean, especially at this point in the season, 21st season here, that if they would have exited the playoffs because somehow the Eagles convert a 2-point conversion, which I don't know why they passed the ball. I thought they were going to run the ball, quite frankly. I don't know that there would have been anything to even compare it to that wasn't like the Peyton Manning game in '06, the Steve McNair game that was a playoff loss where they went out and just lost the football game. This was a victory almost squandered. I mean, it would have been a Pisarcik type of giveaway game at a point where it would have eliminated him from the playoffs or at least put him on the edge of that.
Well, I mean, put the historic context, and I agree with you. It would have been right up there with, they had a tough loss where San Diego came back on them 2 years ago. That was, I believe, November. Wasn't quite this late in the season. They've had some.
But that's the kind of loss that gets a guy like Harbaugh fired in year 9 or 10, right?
And that's the point I was just going to make. That's the kind of, if you lose that football game, everything is on the table in terms of potential changes, potential fallout. I mean, other than Joe Flacco, because of his contract, he's not going anywhere. But beyond that, that's one of those losses that can shake the foundation of a franchise to the point that you make wholesale changes. I mean, that's how close it came there, where we're not just talking about Marty Morningwig in that context. We're talking about John Harbaugh. We're talking about this entire coaching staff. I mean, it really was that close to being that kind of a monumental collapse when you consider the circumstances. I mean, you lose games. You're going to lose close games. I mean, the Ravens have had tough losses. You mentioned the Billy Cundiff game in the AFC Championship in the 2011 season. But you're going to lose some games. I mean, you're going to have some heartbreaking losses. But this was such a self-inflicted situation where, I mean, you just have to have some common sense. You're up 10. You have the ball at the 11-yard line. There's just over 6 minutes remaining. Even if you just run right up to the middle 3 times in a row and get stuffed 3 times in a row, you're either forcing them to take timeouts or you're running a minimum of, roughly, 2 minutes or so off the clock there, give or take a few seconds, so that then you kick a chip shot field goal. It's a 13-point game. You're then saying to Carson Wentz, who did very, very little throwing the football all day. We saw that. It was underneath, and it was them running the ball, save for one really nice completion to Ertz on that final drive where he was able to get the toes in on the sideline. But you're telling the Eagles, we're going to make you score 2 touchdowns now to beat us in what would have been roughly 4 minutes to go. The way that they profiled offensively, they wouldn't have been able to do that. You wouldn't have thought anyway. So it just, again, a head-scratcher. It's on Marty Morningwig. It's on Joe Flacco because, even if that play is called, you can't throw that ball over the middle of the field. You cannot throw that interception.
I chatted with Joe after the game about it, and not the press conference, just Joe and I chatting. And, he realizes what they did, and he realizes, I mean, he had some time to think about it. And I think they all are a little embarrassed in retrospect that they almost lost the season over. I mean, I'm still in some state of shock. I mean, you know me, Luke. I like winning, right? And I'm the guy that can make an excuse for winning. I statused on Sunday after the game. I'm not one to complain about winning, but they didn't look like a playoff team. That just was not. It was it was a disturbing kind of game, I thought. And who knows? They might go win the Super Bowl 6 weeks from now. I mean, that could still happen. They can go to Pittsburgh and they can win. But it's certainly, it's curdled my eggnog this week, if that matters. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it was really alarming to see that. And again, there was plenty of stuff that happened in that game. I mean, the Ravens' vaunted number 1 ranked run defense got gashed. I mean, they really struggled with what Philadelphia was doing with some of their lateral movement along the line of scrimmage and good blocking, good performance from Ryan Matthews, who went well over 100 yards against them. That's just something that hasn't happened this year. You're going to have things that don't go well for you in terms of executing, in terms of maybe not being in the right, the right formation or the right package, depending on the opposing personnel. You're going to have stuff like that. We can second guess, and we talk about that kind of stuff every week. But this just fundamentally, that specific play call and that interception there, I mean, that was just absolutely head-scratching. So you're right. I mean, this was And I'll go back to what I said at the start of our conversation. A win is a win, and let's face it, I mean, the Ravens have won ugly quite often over the last few years especially. I mean, it's kind of been one of the identities of this franchise for the better part of 2 decades, but it's really held true the last few years. They've rarely made things easy on themselves. So, that part of it, it's not stunning, but that play call, that interception, that turn of events, that's the kind of stuff you look at, typically you look at as a Ravens fan, and you laugh at other teams for doing stuff like that. So that was just, that was jarring, I think would probably be the way I would try to best describe it. To see that decision, that lack of execution, just that timing. And then, on the flip side, the defense
got their nose bloodied. Yeah, up and down the field twice, right.
Yeah, so I don't want to keep just going back to the morning league play call, but that does really stand out. It's the same way that you could say, well, the Orioles didn't score any runs other than the Trumbo 2-run shot in the wild card game.
The whole thing was stunk. I mean, they got the ball back after the field goal, right? And 3 and out down on the 9-yard line, mucking around, and they can't run the ball. I understand when there's 9, 10 guys up on the line, it's harder, but, that's what you're supposed to do when you're home. You're supposed to run the ball, get 10 yards on 3 plays, and go home. I mean, that's what you have to do there if you're the offense and you threw the pick. I mean, it was PU right on up until the ball got batted down across the middle. Mosley was involved in that play, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just there was a lot to be concerned about, a lot to be unhappy about, other than the fact that they did get the win. And they needed to because Pittsburgh ended up coming back and winning. I mean, just imagine if the Ravens had lost, and they would have had an opportunity. I should say that they could have, if Pittsburgh had lost. Let me go back and reset here for a second. Pittsburgh was
losing all day, right?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if they had that? Where they had squandered that. I mean, Pittsburgh came back and won, so it kind of made it a moot point. I got backwards there for a second, but it speaks to how much they talk this week about not looking ahead and about bouncing back from what happened Monday night against New England, and Terrell Suggs even acknowledging they were a little messed up after, because this was a really confident football team going into the New England game.
No doubt.
I think the way that they played there, even though they lost by a single possession, but we all know that was
it wasn't a close game.
Yeah, it was thanks more to New England special teams than anything else. I mean, the Ravens, they battled. I mean, we've heard that same narrative so many times in the games they've lost the last couple of years, but clearly didn't play up to a championship caliber level of performance, which you're hoping to be chasing that and finding some of that late in the season. They thought that the Miami game was going to be the start to that. So to have that performance and then to see what transpired on Sunday where they came that close, as you said, a C.J. Mosley tip pass away from potentially losing. I mean, it's just unthinkable for that to happen. And frankly, for that to happen at home especially, just something you don't like seeing. You said it. They could still go to Pittsburgh and win. I mean, there's nothing that says they can. I mean, they've had the Steelers' number. Even Ryan Mallett had the Steelers' number late last year.
This sets up to be a hell of a football game, right? I mean, you can't ask for more when the schedule comes out. Then both of these teams have had enough struggle this year. Hey, that Eagles team, they kicked the Steelers' ass 2 months ago. Beat them, something you're going to be talking about for 4 years if you live in Harrisburg or York up in your part of the world that splits the difference. So, this is a Pittsburgh team that has not been a powerhouse at all, and I think their fan base says they probably can't win a Super Bowl this year, or they're not constructed to do that. But one of these teams is going to be playing football. One of these teams is going to have a home game, 2.5 weeks from now, with a chance to make noise in January. The Ravens need to make sure it's them. And the weirdest part for the Ravens is they're probably healthier than you could have expected them to be. Now, I know Suggs had some issues after the game. Steve Smith got kicked at a point in the game. Levine. We had Zach Orr. We had a lot of guys, getting chipped up and dinged up. But the feeling is this team will go into Pittsburgh and won't be short a key member of its team for Sunday.
Well, Jimmy Smith will
Of course.
He's the
Fair
one
enough.
that's looking. No, I disagree with you a little bit. Pittsburgh's playing well. Since they lost that Dallas game, where they were in a similar position to the Ravens, they had lost 4 in a row. Their season was on the brink. They're playing better. And sure, they didn't play great against Cincinnati on Sunday. They didn't, but they got the win. So,
they went on the road and we're going to have to do the next 2 weeks, right?
And that's the big thing. They've gone on the road these last 2 weeks and they've won games. Well, the Ravens haven't won a road game since week 3. So that's where I will. And clearly, they have the advantage that they're now playing their final 2 games at home. They have the Ravens at home, and then they have Cleveland week 17 at home. So that's something to remember here. As much as everyone's talking about this being the pseudo AFC North championship game, the Ravens not only have to win on Sunday, Christmas Day against the Steelers, they got to go to Cincinnati and win week 17. Which, oh by the way, AJ Green's back practicing now. He didn't play against Pittsburgh, but all signs are pointing to him playing in that game. And the Ravens may or may not have Jimmy Smith on the
Well,
on the
as
field.
we've learned there, if that matchup's wrong, you lose, right?
Yeah, so this is it's clear the Ravens are the team at the major disadvantage here. If you have to handicap this, Pittsburgh is the favorite to win this division right now, and I think overall they've been playing better. Now you could debate whether they're elite, whether they're a serious Super Bowl contender, and as you pointed out, they had their struggles earlier in the season, just like the Ravens have had struggles at various
I would
points.
say there hasn't been a time where either one of these teams, other than some glorious quarter against the Miami Dolphins, where we've really looked at this team and said that they can win 2 or 3 games in January against Oakland or Kansas City, and I know they had their scuffles as well on Sunday, or New England. We saw what they look like against New England on Monday. There's nothing that leads you to believe if they make it to January 15th to get up there that they could do that, but this is a unique thing because they're either going to be out of the playoffs probably at this point, or they're going to be a division winner. So getting a home game when they've struggled the way they've struggled this year, the Ravens have had 7 or 8 years where they've been a better football team than this, and at this point in the year, you just knew they couldn't play at home in January. They were going to have to go on the road. So, I think that changes things, but I think having seen this act now the last couple of weeks, I find it very, very – I don't know what the odds would be in Vegas, but I'd like to go to Vegas right now and see what you would get if you think the Ravens can win in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. If you really believe that's going to happen, I got a Vegas book somewhere out there. You could probably make a lot of money on it because I would say the odds are stacked against them at this point.
I think, other than blind hope, other than they are division games, and certainly the Ravens have played well against Pittsburgh over the last few years. There's no disputing that. They've won in Pittsburgh. So that's not out of the question. But you're right. I think when you look at the task of not just beating Pittsburgh, which they obviously have to do, but because Pittsburgh was able to come back and win in Cincinnati, you remain a game behind. What would have been huge for the Ravens is holding on and winning, and then Pittsburgh losing that game. These teams would have been tied for first place, and then you would have had an opportunity, if you're the Ravens, with a win week 16, they would have had a game up and the tiebreaker. They would have had the division. The division would have been theirs. So now you look at it, because Pittsburgh won, that you not only have to win there, but you have to beat the Bengals because, you just mentioned going to Vegas, finding anyone that wants to bet on the Browns beating Pittsburgh at Heinz Field week 17. Now there's something you can make money on. So it's just, this is going to be a daunting task. And in terms of where the Ravens' hopes would lie if they make it to the playoffs, well, if you win both those games and you get a home playoff game, maybe they're certainly battle tested at that point. You would assume the offense will have had to raise its level of play pretty significantly to a point that we really haven't seen them play on the road all year. So if they get to that point, who knows? But you're right. You look at it now objectively, as we're now under a week away from Christmas, and knowing how big that game is, knowing that the Ravens, when they play Sunday, line up Christmas Day at Heinz Field, it will be exactly 3 months to the day that they last won a road game. I think it is something that you look at and say, well, this is where they have a chance. But we've known from the time that the schedule came out in late April that final month of the season was going to be an absolute bear. So you can talk about that, or And I know some people even, and I saw you made the comment on Twitter.
Did I?
Watching the Jets on Saturday night get their tails kicked at home by the Miami Dolphins, and injuries or not for the Ravens at that point, that's still the game I look at in the grand scheme of the entire season, looking at the big picture. That's the game that I look at and say, wow.
How did you lose that game? Yeah.
Look how big that one is looming in terms of where their playoff fate may fall. And, yeah, they still have a chance to make that a non-issue, but it's not going to be easy. And based on what we saw again on Sunday, it's hard to really take too much from that and say, there's something else that gives you confidence moving forward.
He is Luke Jones. We got so much more to talk about. We're going to go to Philadelphia. We're going to go to Pittsburgh this week. We're going to tear it all apart. I'm also going to throw some Caps, some Orioles, some holiday spirits in here. I might even serve some eggnog before it's all over with. We got some events we're going to be out doing this week as well. You want to check the website and check our social media for all that. But we're going to get into Steve Smith and Kamar Aiken and Brashad Perryman and drop balls and the running game and the defense and all that good stuff as the week gets going. You can find anything you miss in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Don't forget, we're going to be up at Adams Jeep on Tuesday night. We had Mike Wallace working on some other issues this week and next Tuesday at Adams Jeep up in Aberdeen, so stay tuned out on our social media for that. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Our London trip is now on sale. We would love to have you come along. I've had hundreds of people reach to me. This is a big week for sales for us as we've locked down this trip, so all that information's up at WNST.net as well. You can also email me on that. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.